The 1970s, the age of disco. That was the popular music of the 1970s. Not really much around today when it comes to disco. So, as we look at the 1970s, we're going to start with the oil crisis. Sometimes you'll hear the term the energy crisis. That's a result of the oil crisis. Back in the late 60s, the U.S. supported Israel. Israel was attacked by Syria and Egypt. Israel, of course, is located in the Middle East and has been an ally of the U.S. since it was first founded back in 1948. And Israel is the most loyal ally we have in the Middle East, as well as probably the strongest country in the Middle East. Well, Syria and Egypt, they lose the war. We helped Israel. And OPEC, which is the oil producing exporting countries, they responded with an oil embargo. They stopped selling oil. And so, of course, when supply goes down, prices go up. So the price of oil per barrel, which is how it is sold even today, goes up. And so, with the lack of oil, you see gas shortages, and really, in some places, gas stations ran out of gas. All right, and so long lines became the norm, and you had to ration to the point where they based it on your license plate. Where if you have, if your say your license plate ended with an odd number, you could buy gas on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Even numbers would buy on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. It's the 70s, so gas stations were closed at that point, as most businesses were on Sundays. You see a rise in gas from 25 cents a gallon to 65 cents a gallon, which doesn't seem like much to us today, of course, but given the difference in such as minimum wage, which was below $3 an hour, just the way money was, 65 cents in today's money would make it about twice as much as what we're paying, which right now is somewhere around 2.60 a gallon. So figure you'd be paying over $5 a gallon for gas. How would that sound? There's a picture. Sorry, no gas. Speed limit was changed during the 70s. They lowered it nationally to 55. Driving at 55, you saved gas. You didn't use as much gas as you would if you were driving 70 miles an hour. And there's a picture of a gas station, people waiting in line for a chance to buy some gas. So, as we had talked about with Vietnam and other times in Cold War, Nixon is president. We looked at the Vietnam War, of course. Now we're going to look at his other foreign policy ideas. President Nixon is going to be the first president to open relations with communist China. We had basically been ignoring the communists since they took over in 1948. We had an embargo. We didn't trade with them. Americans, you couldn't go there on an American passport, things like that. Well, Nixon decides it's time to change that. And so, starting in 1970, during the months of January and February, American politicians, ambassadors, and Chinese ambassadors met in Warsaw, Poland. And they're, of course, discussing ways to normalize relations between the two countries. In March of 1971, the U.S. lifted travel restrictions. Now you could travel to China if you had an American passport. June that year, we ended the trade embargo, and companies were just waiting to start trading. China has a lot of neat items that the U.S. wanted to get its hands on that we would like, that the American public would like to buy. At the same time, you got close to 1 billion Chinese men in 1971 that you could now start selling things to. Then in February, President Nixon becomes the first American president to visit China. There's a picture of President Nixon on the right, and that's the Chinese Communist leader Mao Zedong on the left. Nixon also changes the relations with the Soviet Union. We had very tense relations, just a few, not that long, about 9 years since the Cuban Missile Crisis, almost 10. In 1969, Nixon decides to initiate this, and the U.S. and the USSR start talks on limiting nuclear weapons. It leads to a treaty. It takes 3 years, but the Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty was signed in 1972, commonly referred to as SALT I. And what it did is each country agreed that they wouldn't build any more missiles than what they had in 1972. So if the U.S. had 1,000, we wouldn't build another one and make it 1001. We could replace old ones, but for every one you built, then you had to eliminate one of your old ones. That leads you to the election of 1972. Richard Nixon is nominated by the Republicans. The Democrats nominate George McGovern. There's McGovern. Remember that Nixon won a close election in 1968 by less than 1 million votes. Well, in 1972, he's in one of the top 2 electoral landslides, presidential landslides in American history. He wins the Electoral College 538 to 17, and he wins the popular vote by almost 18 million popular votes. Huge landslide for Nixon in 1972. There's the map. You can see the only state that he lost was Massachusetts. Washington, D.C. goes to McGovern as well. D.C. kind of can't really count them. They get 3 electoral votes, but since they started voting in the 1960 election, they've never given their votes to a Republican. So again, you can see almost the entire country is red.